Hello and welcome to this new episode of I Dream of Wise. It's been a few years, but today in this new episode, I'm going to show you a few tips and tricks that I learned along the way that will hopefully make your workflow a bit easier and a bit faster inside of the Wise authoring tool. For this video specifically, I will show you only some techniques that are available within the Wise authoring tool itself without having to rely on some external scripts or extension or anything that deals with WAPI. A lot of you will probably be already familiar with some of the things I'm going to say, but nonetheless, I hope that this video will prove to be useful for you. All right, let's get started. And as the first thing, I wanted to talk about some basic parameter operations. And this is, again, probably something you know already, but of course, you can turn up and down the voice volume slider by clicking and holding with your left mouse button, but you can also press up and down on the slider field to make small adjustments like 1 dB plus or minus every single time you click. This is very useful, for example, when you have Wise connected and you want to mix your gain by turning stuff up or down by a very controllable amount. Not only you can do that, but you can also do a control click to reset the parameter to 0 dB. And that works also on fields like pitch and low pass. You can control click to reset them. Finally, if you want some fine tuning, you can hold shift while you move the mouse around. And you can see that you have now an additional decimal point that you can customize to fine-tune your setting. And holding shift allows you to do something that I don't know why you would want to do, but it's there. So if you hold shift, you see you can go up above the 12 dB maximum value for the voice volume field. And yeah, again, be careful with that, but yeah, it's something that might turn out useful. The second tip revolves around something a bit similar. So we're still talking about parameters, but now we'll talk about parameters offsets. So if you select a field and you type 5+, for example, and press enter, you see we increased the value of that field by 5 dBs. Again, I selected type 6- enter, and we decreased the value of this parameter by 6 dBs. So basically, if you enter any number followed by a plus or minus symbol, you're going to add or subtract that amount to what is already in there. And not only you can use it in this context, but let's say that you have, I don't know, voice pitch RTPC curve driven by, I have no idea, this RTPC. So let's say that this is your curve and it looks like this. And then you duplicate this curve and you control the voice volume instead with that. And if you select both curves, you can select, for example, these points and say 5+. And you see, in this case, it doesn't make a lot of sense because the range of the RTPC is only 0 to 1. But if I type, for example, 0.1-, there you go. Both points move to the left by 0.1. Same thing if I type 0.2 here, they're gonna move to the right by 0.2. And this situation is a little bit different from what we saw in the general settings view, because in here, if I select more than 1 point, it automatically shows me just 0 here, because it automatically goes into some kind of like offset mode. So I can also do this. And this is particularly helpful, yeah, in the RTPC view when, I don't know, maybe you want very specific values to be set at very specific points along the x-axis. This offset functions also work really, really well when combined to the multi-edit view. So if you right-click on a selection of containers and select Show in Multi-Editor, I really suggest that you learn the shortcut for that, which is Control-M. You can then go and change a few parameters all at the same time. This is not probably the most intuitive thing about the Wwise UI, because I was talking to some students and they were telling me, well, can't I just select a bunch of objects in the project explorer and move the voice volume parameter up and down to affect all of them? And the answer is no. You will only ever change the value of what you will see in the name field up here. So if I set this to -14, it will only affect the physics actor mixer, the one whose name you see here in the top field. So if you want to change all of them, you select the multi-editor, show in multi-editor, Control M. So in here, you see now that the voice volume field has got a little dash in it. That means that the values assigned to the voice volume of these 3 actor mixers, and you can verify that we're talking about 3 objects by looking at here, 3 objects selected. It means that the values are different, right? So we can use the offsets we just learned how to do in this field by typing, for example, 5+, and you'll see the voice volume of the physics actor mixer increase from -14 to -9, and the interactables and UI actor mixers also increased by 5 dBs. And you can use this trick, of course, for all the other parameter fields as well. The multi-editor updates automatically in terms of the objects it's gonna affect. But yeah, it's always a good habit to verify that the amount of objects that we're gonna affect is consistent with what we expect. Right, for this next tip, I resetted the default layout to the factory defaults. And you can do so by selecting this option, in case you're wondering. Layouts, reset factory layouts. And as you can see in the bottom left, you have the contextual help. And this is a really, really helpful tool. If you select and edit a parameter, it will update to display what that parameter is for and its characteristics. It's really, really handy. Personally, I don't use it very often. I don't have it docked in my default layout. What I prefer to use instead is this question mark in here. And as you can see from all the different views in Wwise, that question mark is always present in the top right. And if you click on it, it opens a page in your browser that refers to the Wwise documentation. And this is a very, very thorough explanation of every single parameter in that view. So this is the property editor blend container help, because we clicked on the question mark when a blend container was selected. If we clicked on the question mark with a switch container selected, there you go. Page not found. Oops. I guess we'll have to report this to Audiokinetic. But yeah, let's try this instead on the Project Explorer. There you go, Audio tab in the Project Explorer. This is because, yeah, the Audio tab was selected. Let's try it with the Events tab. There you go, Events tab. And this is really, really useful. I literally use this all the time, because otherwise you would have to go to the Audiokinetic website, look for the documentation, look for the correct page in the search field. The help tools in the Wwise authoring tool are really, really well done. And by the way, if you don't have access to the web from your workstation, you can also set the documentation to open from your own computer. You can download it when you install Wwise. In this case, I don't have the Wwise documentation installed because I always access it from online. Next up, in the default designer layout, you've got the event viewer. And this is how it looks like by default. I have to say, I never really used this, the event viewer. And whenever I used it, it was always by selecting the current selection tab so that I could see what events were playing or stopping or doing any kind of action on my selected object in the audio tab. But what I prefer to do by a lot is to use the reference view instead. And you can open the reference view by looking at utilities and reference view. I changed the shortcut to just F3. The default is Shift F3, if I remember correctly. And the cool thing about the reference view is that it will tell you exactly the same information that the event viewer, based on current selection, will tell you. So it will tell you what events play or do any kind of action on the selected object. But on top of that, it will also tell you what action those events will do on the selected object. So you see here, there's a little play icon. But for example, in this case, you can see that there is both a play event that affects it and a stop event that affects it. And you can tell that there are a play and a stop event of this object, not just by the name of the events, but also by the little icons. You see the play icon and the stop icon. And if we wanted to, for example, have a seek action on that object, you see now that there is that little seek icon in there. So you can tell immediately, just at a glance, what action is being performed on a specific object from a specific event. And if this wasn't cool enough for the reference view also tells us a bunch of stuff about other objects within Wwise, like any object. So for example, it tells me that these 3 switches are used by these 3 switch containers, and it tells me that this state is used by that music switch container, and it tells me that these RTPCs are used in all of these containers. So again, I prefer this reference view to the default events viewer by a long shot. Right, so let's talk about workflow a bit when it comes to creating containers. This is something that probably a lot of you already know, but let's talk about it anyway. Of course, you can click on these icons to create a child object of that type inside of your hierarchy, right? So I can create any object that is currently not grayed out. But if you select an object and hold Shift, you will see that the available objects change. Why is that? Because if we now click on, for example, the blend container icon, that will create a parent blend container of the selected object. So you see how the blend container I clicked on became a parent of the object I had selected. And of course, this works even with multiple items selected. So for example, if I click on the random container now, it will create a random container that has all of those objects as children. And this is exactly the workflow I use all the time when I import assets in Wwise. I tend to import them by just dragging them from the Windows Explorer. I import a bunch of WAV files, I select them all, and I will hold Shift and click on the random container icon to create a parent random container that will play them all. And this little workflow tip brings me to the next topic I wanted to talk about, which is keyboard shortcuts and commands, which you can access by selecting Projects, Keyboard Shortcuts and Commands. Right, so the default Wwise shortcuts are not my favorite, let's say, because a lot of the time they involve a lot of modifiers, and maybe they involve using 2 hands. So what I really suggest that you do is to just have a look at this list and customize the shortcuts that you use the most to speed up your workflow. I will tell you the ones that I customized because I use them the most. They are create new child actor mixer, blend container, random container, sequence container, and switch container. And I customized them in a way that kind of made sense. So I think this was the default one, right? The default standard. So Control-Shift-Alt-B would create a child bus, like 3 modifiers to create something that is like one of the most common objects that you will create in Wwise. So I just changed that to be Alt-A, Alt-B for a blend container, Alt-R and Alt-S for random and sequence container, Alt-E for switch. For some reason, just because Alt-S was already taken by the sequence container. And Alt-E is something I can still press with my left hand without having to use both hands. And I have just a different modifier, but the same letters for the opposite. So like to create a parent actor mixer, parent blend container, and so on. Parent random container is Shift R, for example. This is the one I use probably the most, Shift R. As I said earlier, I tend to import all of my wave assets in Wwise just without using any kind of templates, and then I select them all and press Shift R to create a random parent container for them. So yeah, these are some of the ones I use the most. Then I customize my solo shortcut to be exactly the same as the one I'm used to in Reaper, and before that in Pro Tools. So Shift S will solo the object or bus that I currently have selected. And to reset all solos, so the same as like this button over here, I will press Shift Alt S. Same thing goes for mute, by the way. Shift M to mute, and reset on mute, Shift Alt M. This is something I use a bit less because it involves using both ends. But it's the same I had mapped in Reaper after I learned it in Pro Tools. So to me and for my specific workflow, it makes sense. I also customized the capture, the toggle, so start and stop capture to be just C, and I use this all the time. And same thing for the live toggle show live data with F. Really use both very often, and they're very easily reachable with my left hand as well, so it makes them even faster to use. And then, well, there are the show in Project Explorer. Project Explorer. Yeah, so these ones are very common. The find in Project Explorer shortcuts. So how do we normally use them? Well, one of the ways I use them the most is when I do this. Select a container, select the event that plays that container, and press show in Project Explorer. And sometimes I show it in a second Project Explorer that I have docked to the right. This is how a lot of people work with Wwise, with two Project Explorers, one for the audio tab and one for the events tab to the left and right of the screen. This is most comfortable to have if you have a fairly large monitor with a high resolution. It works well for this screen because it's a 4K screen. With a 1080p screen, it would be a bit harder. But yeah, anyway, Project Explorer, you can have up to 4. And I have mapped them to 1, 2, 3, 4. You see, the default shortcuts are Ctrl-Shift-1, Ctrl-Shift-2, Ctrl-Shift-3, and 4. But I mapped them to 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, there is a bit of a downside to this. Like, I love this shortcut because it's just very intuitive for me. But there is downside to that, which is quite funny. Maybe it's something that, I don't know, possibly Audiokinetic could fix. But if I look for something like cooler 1, it won't work here. So you can't type numbers 1, 2, 3, 4 in the find field anymore if you use them for a shortcut in Wwise. So something to keep in mind, but thankfully there is a bit of a workaround. So if you have a numpad, you can still type these numbers on the numpad. Another couple of shortcuts that I use all the time are pin unpin. So if you look at this, toggle pin is the one I use. Toggle pin. It says here unknown DF. That's, yeah, a bit weird, but that's the name of the key in my UK keyboard that is right to the left of number 1 and above the tab key. So what does this do? What does pin unpin do? It's the thing that you always turn on by mistake and realized like a few minutes later that you had the container pinned. So it's this little pin here in the transport control, and what allows you to do is to pin the container that you want to audition. So for example, if you want to preview how this sounds as you keep navigating through its hierarchy and make changes here and there, then you can do so by pinning it. Because otherwise, if I had this unpinned and started previewing this and changed my selection to something else, the preview will stop. So this is a very handy shortcut to have rather than always having to reach out to this little button over there, which became bigger a couple of years ago or something, because it used to be very small and very deceiving. Like it was a little red dot, very easy to miss. Last shortcut I'm going to show you is this, which is collapse all. It's the same thing as doing control click on the little arrow, but it's just a button that I press, and it's I think it's called collapse descendants. Yeah, and I mapped it to 5. So all of that first row of buttons, I use it for something. From the unknown DF key for the toggle pin, 1, 2, 3, 4 to find in Project Explorer, and 5 to collapse descendants. Now, I used to have mapped also the opposite of collapse descendants, which is, I think, expand descendants. Oh yeah, I still have it mapped, but I should remove it because I did it once on a particularly large project and it crashed my Wwise because I think I tried to expand the whole hierarchy. Crashed my Wwise, and then that got saved. Like the fact that the whole hierarchy should have been opened got saved in the project settings, and so I couldn't even open the Wwise project anymore after that, and I had to find the config file where the expand and collapse state of every object is stored and delete that to reset it and to be able to open the Wwise project again. Next up is an action in an event that may not be as intuitive, and you may not know about it. I certainly didn't know about it for quite some time. I only found out about it a few years ago, just randomly. And it's the stop actor mixer action. Now, why would you stop an actor mixer? Like, you can't play an actor mixer. It doesn't allow you to, and rightfully so. Like, how would you play an actor mixer? It's not something that's supposed to be played, but you can stop an actor mixer. And this is incredibly powerful if you structure your Wwise hierarchy in a certain way. So the way I use it, for example, is in the animation actor mixer. If, there's often that problem where a character animation can be interrupted before it finishes and another animation would trigger. So instead of having a stop event for every single animation in that actor mixer, you can have just a stop event with a little fade on the parent actor mixer. Let's imagine this was called animations. And by calling that event as an animation is interrupted, then you make sure that any sound that was included in that actor mixer playing on that game object is going to stop. This is super helpful. And another situation where I use it is, for example, on the vocalizations of a specific creature. So let's say this is a voice Fran. And of course, my voice can't overlap on itself. So I always need to make sure that only one line can be played at the same time. And of course, you can do so by limiting sound instance to 1 per game object, but it's a very dirty way of doing that I really don't like, because it can introduce issues. And what if there is a blend container where my voice is layered with something else? That blend container would be 2 voices, so 1 wouldn't play. I mean, it can introduce all kinds of issues. And also, if you wanted a fade out on the stop event, that wouldn't really work with this. So yeah, what I recommend instead is to have all of the vocalizations neatly nested in this actor mixer and just call a stop event if, for example, you want to stop the previous vocalization to play one that has a higher priority or something. Right, next up, I wanted to show the edit in external editor. Now, you can do a lot of fancy stuff with WAPI and, for example, open the Reaper session where the asset was created in and all that. But in this video, I wanted to focus on only the workflow tips that you can do with vanilla Wwise without any additional scripts. So you can select open in external editor. You can see now that I don't have any mapped because this is a new Wwise install, but I can go on manage external editors and add my RX8. And I mapped this to the same shortcut that I use in Reaper, which is Control-Alt-E. So I can just do this and sure, check it out. Yeah, you see, that's very cool as well, because not only it allows me to save it in an external editor. Well, that's a noisy asset, but not only it allows me to open it in external editor, but it also checks it out. So if I make any kind of changes, I don't know, fade this out, save it, overwrite original file is what I did, and it will be checked out. You see it's now blue in Wise. Oh, and you can do something else as well. You can see, this wasn't planned, but I'm going to show it. There you go. And Wise has this crazy wave viewer where you can see the differences. And you can see that I only changed the part in here. And you can see the difference between the two waveforms here. Yeah, can be useful, for example, if you declick something. So you see that only the clicks will show up in the diff view. Right, one more. Sometimes what you want is to minimize duplicates. That's something I sure want, because I really don't like to maintain duplicates of hierarchies or duplicate containers and all that. But sometimes, you know, like you still need some flexibility. So a cool solution that I found in a similar situation was this. So what was the situation? So in here, we've got an event, play fizz impact monitor, that plays the impact of a monitor. And it's a one shot, it's not looping or anything, but it could happen that I want to trigger instead, not just a one shot impact of the monitor, but also maybe a random container that plays the impacts of the monitor looping with a specific trigger rate of 0.15. Right? It's very, very easy to do it in Wise, because I can do just this. Oh, by the way, to rename the previous one, I pressed Shift Tab. You can rename containers that are close by pressing Tab and Shift Tab. Anyways, I can just create an event that is a play event for my loop. Let's have a look at it here. One sec. So play fizz impact monitor loop will play the looping event for that container, while play fizz impact monitor will play the exact same container, but with a one-shot sound instead. So what this means is that if I want to increase the volume of this by a crazy amount, it will affect both events. And if I change the pitch, same thing. Right? And this, to me, was very useful in a specific case where I had to work on weapon tails. Weapon tails were shared across weapons of similar size, but some of these weapons were automatic and needed a looping event, and some of these weapons were instead relying on a single one-shot play event. So by structuring the Wise hierarchy in this way, I could minimize the amount of duplicates that I had to do. Right. Finally, for the very last tip of this video, I wanted to introduce you to a view that you may not be familiar with, because I believe it's never been included by default in any of the layouts. And this view is related to mixing. So if you switch to F8, you will see the familiar or not mixing session. I'm not a huge fan of this view because it's a bit cumbersome. I don't know, you always have to drag the buses in. I don't know, you have to scroll a lot. Sometimes it doesn't quite fit. I don't know. I tend not to use this very often. I use it only when I want to make sure that my routing is correct. If I do some stuff with auxiliary sense, for example. But sometimes, like, this is a small project, so we don't have that many buses in here. But sometimes your projects, you know, are very big and they have a lot of buses, and this view can be a bit limiting if you want to have a bit of an overview of everything that's going on. So here is where the master mixer console view can come in handy, because it will list you every single bus that is contained in your master mixer hierarchy, together with basic information such as, you know, all of the bus parameters, voice volume, pitch, low pass filter, high pass filter, and any kind of effects that you have instanced on these buses. And the other cool thing is that you see this meter section will display you the actual meters. So it will show if there is signal or not. And right now, most of these buses don't have any effects instanced on them, which is the reason why you don't see a meter, because they're not mixing buses. But yeah, there's the usual trick of just adding gain plugin to a bus to be able to display its meter. Right? Oh my God, it's all sounding so bad because I changed so many parameters just at random. So yeah, this could be a very, very useful mixing view to maybe attach to, like your mixing layout, to basically have a better overview of your project and, solo whatever you want, and, have a bit of an easier time understanding what is going on in your game mix. Right, that was the last one of my tips and tricks about Wwise, and thank you so much for watching. If you have any comments or if you have any other tricks that you would like to share, please let me know in the comments. Thank you very much, and see you next time.